A dog does not travel through a freezing storm for no reason. And when that dog finally reaches the one person he was searching for, the secret he carries can change two lives forever. The winter winds moved across the quiet mountains of Montana, covering the empty roads and tall pine trees with a thick blanket of snow. The world felt still, almost forgotten. Inside a small wooden cabin at the edge of the forest, Captain Daniel Brooks sat alone beside a warm fireplace, listening to the sound of the storm outside. At 41 years old, Daniel had learned how to live with silence. Once, his days were filled with missions, responsibilities, and the bond he shared with his military K-9 partner. Now, his life was simple. A cup of coffee in the morning, long walks through the snow, quiet evenings where old memories stayed hidden. To anyone passing by, Daniel looked like a man who had found peace. But he knew the truth. Some people do not leave the past behind. They simply learn how to carry it. Years earlier, Daniel had served as a U.S. Marine K-9 handler. His closest partner was a German shepherd named Ranger. The two had spent countless days together, building a connection that went beyond training. Ranger was more than a working dog. He was a friend, a companion, a loyal soul who always seemed to understand when words were not enough. But time changed everything. Daniel left the service. Life moved forward, and Ranger disappeared from his world. Daniel often wondered where the old K-9 ended up, but he never expected to see him again. Especially not on a night like this. Just after midnight, a sound came from outside the cabin. At first, Daniel thought it was only the wind moving through the trees. Then he heard it again, a slow movement through the snow. He opened the door and looked into the darkness. Standing beneath the falling snow was an old German shepherd. His fur was covered in frost. His muzzle was gray. His steps were slower than Daniel remembered, but his eyes were the same. Daniel froze. "Ranger," he whispered. The dog looked up at him. For a moment, neither of them moved. It was as if years of distance disappeared in one quiet second. Then Daniel noticed something behind the old K-9. A heavy military ammo box rested in the snow, connected to a worn strap. The box was covered with ice and marked with scratches from years of being carried. Daniel stepped outside slowly. He recognized that type of container immediately. It belonged to a world he thought he had already left behind. "Where did you get this?" Daniel asked softly. Ranger did not answer, of course. He simply stood there, watching his former partner. Not confused, not afraid, almost as if he had completed a journey he was meant to finish. Daniel looked at the box again and noticed something that made his heart pause. There was a name written on the side, a name he had not seen in years. Michael Carter, his old friend, his old teammate, the man connected to a promise Daniel never forgot. The storm continued around them, but Daniel barely felt the cold anymore. Because standing in front of him was not just an old dog with a mysterious box. It was a piece of his past returning. And inside that box was a story waiting to be discovered. Daniel had spent years trying to forget the sound of the past. But that night, standing outside his cabin with snow falling around him, he realized the past had never forgotten him. Ranger stood quietly beside the old ammo box, his breathing slow and steady as if he had carried not only a heavy container, but a memory that waited patiently for the right moment to return. Daniel guided the old German shepherd inside the cabin and carefully closed the door behind them. The warmth from the fireplace filled the room, melting the frost on Ranger's fur. For the first time in many years, the small cabin did not feel empty. It felt like someone had come home. Daniel placed a blanket near the fireplace and watched as Ranger rested. The dog looked older than he remembered. Time had changed him, but the loyalty in his eyes was still the same. Daniel sat beside him and quietly said, "I thought I would never see you again." Ranger slowly lifted his head, almost as if he understood. Daniel looked toward the ammo box sitting near the doorway. He had spent years learning how to open difficult things. But this was different. This box was not locked with metal. It was locked with memories. Before opening it, Daniel searched for any markings that could explain where it came from. The name on the side remained clear. Michael Carter. The name belonged to someone Daniel had not spoken about in a long time. Michael was not just another Marine. He was the person who stood beside Daniel during the hardest moments of his service. He was the friend who trusted him more than anyone else. And he was the person who left behind a promise Daniel never knew how to complete. Daniel reached for the old box, but his hand stopped. For a moment, he simply stared at it. The memories came back slowly. A young Marine with a smile that could calm any difficult day. A loyal K-9 who followed every command. Conversations about family, dreams, and the future. Then life changed. People went different directions. Promises became harder to keep. Daniel had always believed that some chapters were better left closed. But Ranger had returned to open one. Carefully, Daniel lifted the lid. Inside, everything was arranged with surprising care. There were old photographs wrapped in protective paper. There were handwritten letters tied together with a simple string. There was a small family keepsake that looked like it had been protected for years. Daniel picked up the first photograph and felt his heart sink. It showed Michael smiling beside his family. A family Daniel had never met. Behind the photograph was a handwritten note. Daniel unfolded it slowly. The first words made him stop breathing for a moment. Daniel, if you are reading this, then Ranger found his way back. The cabin became completely silent. The storm continued outside, but Daniel heard only those words. He looked at Ranger, who was resting peacefully near the fire. Somehow, after all these years, this old K-9 had returned carrying a message that was never meant to be forgotten. And Daniel knew the truth. The box was not just filled with memories from the past. It was carrying a promise that was still waiting to be fulfilled. Daniel read the letter 3 times before he allowed himself to believe the words were real. The handwriting was familiar. The feeling behind it was even more familiar. It was the voice of a friend who had trusted him enough to leave behind something important. Outside the cabin, the winter storm slowly moved across the mountains, but inside, Daniel felt as if time had stopped. He placed the letter carefully on the table and looked toward Ranger. The old German shepherd was resting beside the fireplace, his eyes closed, peaceful after a journey no one could explain. Daniel whispered, "You really carried this all the way back." The dog opened his eyes for a moment, then rested his head again. It was a small gesture, but Daniel felt the meaning behind it. The next morning, the storm had passed. The mountains were covered in fresh snow, and the world outside looked completely different. Daniel carried the ammo box to his wooden table and began looking through every item inside. He moved slowly, almost afraid that rushing would somehow disturb the memories hidden within. The first photograph showed Michael Carter standing beside Ranger years earlier. Daniel remembered that day clearly. Michael had always believed that loyalty was something you proved through actions, not words. He was the kind of person who remembered birthdays, checked on friends, and noticed when someone needed help before they asked. Daniel continued searching through the box until he found another letter. This one was addressed to him. The message explained that Michael had hoped Ranger would one day return to Daniel if circumstances allowed. Michael wrote about his family and his greatest wish, that they would always know how much they were loved. Daniel lowered the letter and looked away. For years, he carried the belief that he had failed his friend. He thought leaving the service meant he had walked away from a responsibility he should have protected. But now, sitting in that quiet cabin, he started to see things differently. Maybe some promises were not broken. Maybe some promises were simply waiting for the right moment to be completed. Ranger slowly walked over and rested beside Daniel's chair. The old K-9 moved carefully, but his presence was strong. Daniel placed a hand gently on his fur and remembered the years they spent together. He remembered training sessions, long walks, and the silent understanding between a Marine and his dog. That connection had never disappeared. It had only been waiting. Among the items inside the box was one final clue, a small card with an address written on it. Daniel recognized the location immediately. It belonged to Michael's family. He sat there for a long time, holding the card in his hand. The idea of reaching out brought many emotions. What would he say after all these years? Would they want to hear from him? Would they understand why he was coming now? Ranger stood near the door, looking toward the snowy road outside. Daniel followed his gaze. For the first time in many years, he felt something he thought he had lost. A sense of purpose. The old Marine closed the ammo box and placed the letter safely inside. The journey was not over. In fact, it was only beginning. Because the box had not returned to him, so he could remember the past. It had returned because someone in that past still needed to be found. Daniel spent the next morning staring at the address written on the small card. It was only a few hours away, but somehow it felt like a journey across an entire lifetime. For years, he had avoided looking back. He had convinced himself that staying away was easier than facing the people and memories connected to his old life. But now, With Ranger waiting quietly by the door, Daniel understood something important. Running from the past did not make it disappear. Sometimes, the past returned because it still had something meaningful to give. He placed the ammo box carefully in the back of his truck and prepared for the drive. Ranger sat beside him, watching the snowy landscape pass through the window. The old German shepherd seemed peaceful, almost certain that they were finally going the right direction. The road stretched through small Montana towns, frozen fields, and quiet mountain paths. Daniel kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other near the old box beside him. Every mile brought back another memory of Michael Carter. He remembered the conversations they shared during their years together. Michael always talked about his family with pride. He carried pictures of them wherever he went. He believed that even during difficult times, the people waiting at home were the reason every sacrifice mattered. As Daniel arrived at the small neighborhood listed on the card, he slowed down. The houses looked warm and familiar, with lights shining through windows and children playing nearby. It was a simple place, a place filled with ordinary moments that Michael had always wanted to protect. Daniel parked the truck and looked at Ranger. "I do not know if this is the right thing," he said softly. Ranger looked back at him with calm eyes. Daniel took a deep breath and carried the ammo box toward the front door. Before he could knock, the door opened. Standing there was a woman with a surprised expression. Her name was Sarah Carter, Michael's wife. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Daniel saw the same kindness in her eyes that he remembered from Michael's stories. "Daniel?" she finally asked. His name sounded like a memory coming back to life. Daniel nodded slowly. "I am sorry it took so long." Those words carried years of emotions. Sarah looked past him and noticed Ranger standing beside the truck. Her expression changed immediately. She stepped outside and walked closer to the old K9. "Ranger," she whispered. The dog looked at her, and for a brief moment, the years between the past and present felt smaller. Sarah placed a hand gently on Ranger's collar. She remembered the dog from another time, when Michael was still there and their family was younger. Then a small voice came from inside the house. "Mom, who is it?" A child stepped toward the doorway. His name was Noah Williams. He was 10 years old, with curious eyes and a quiet expression. Daniel looked at him and felt something he could not explain. There was something familiar in the way the boy looked at the world. Sarah looked back at Daniel and then at the ammo box in his hands. "I think," she said softly, "there are some things my son should know." Daniel opened the box carefully. The snow continued falling around them, but no one noticed the cold anymore. Because after years of waiting, a forgotten promise had finally reached the people it was meant for. The room became quiet as Daniel opened the old ammo box and placed it on the wooden table. For a moment, no one moved. The box that had traveled through the winter snow, carried by an aging K9 with a purpose nobody understood, was now sitting in front of the people who needed to see it most. Sarah Carter stood beside her son Noah, watching as Daniel carefully removed the first items inside. Each piece carried a story. Each piece carried a memory that had waited years to be found. The first photograph showed Michael Carter smiling beside Ranger during their time together. Noah looked closely at the picture, noticing the young German shepherd standing proudly beside a man he had only known through stories. "That is him," Noah whispered. Daniel looked at the boy and nodded. "Yes, that is your father." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that filled the room. Noah had heard stories about Michael, but seeing these memories made everything feel real. Daniel continued opening the box. He found letters, old photographs, and small personal items that Michael had carefully protected. None of them were valuable because of their price. They were valuable because they represented love, family, and moments that could never be replaced. Sarah held one of the letters in her hands. She recognized Michael's handwriting immediately. Her eyes filled with emotion as she remembered the person behind those words. "He always believed memories mattered," she said quietly. Daniel looked down. He remembered that about Michael. He remembered how his friend never measured life by accomplishments or possessions. Michael cared about people. He cared about making sure those around him knew they were loved. Noah listened as Daniel shared stories about his father. He heard about Michael's kindness, his humor, and the way he always trusted Ranger completely. For the first time, Noah was not just hearing about someone from the past. He was discovering the person his father had been. Ranger rested near the table, watching the family reconnect. The old K9 9 no longer seemed like a dog carrying a mystery. He looked like a guardian protecting a memory. Later that evening, Daniel sat outside with Noah while Sarah organized the photographs inside. The snow had stopped, leaving the neighborhood peaceful and quiet. Noah looked at Ranger and asked, "Was he always like this?" Daniel smiled. "Ranger?" Noah nodded. "Yes, he was always loyal. Your father trusted him more than anyone." Noah looked toward the house. "Did my dad know he would come back?" Daniel thought about the letter. He thought about the years that had passed and the journey that brought them all together. "I think your father hoped that if the right moment ever came, Ranger would find his way." Noah looked at the old K9 with a gentle smile. "I am glad he did." Daniel felt those words deeply, because he was beginning to understand that Ranger's journey was not only about delivering a box. It was about delivering a connection that time had never been able to erase. That night, Daniel looked at the old ammo box one more time. The mystery inside was becoming clearer, but he also knew something important. The letters and photographs were only the beginning. Somewhere among those memories was the final message Michael wanted them to discover. The morning arrived quietly, bringing soft sunlight over the small neighborhood where a forgotten promise had finally found its way home. Daniel Brooks stood near the window, watching snow slowly melt from the trees outside. For the first time in many years, he felt a kind of peace he had almost forgotten existed. The night before had changed something. He had entered Sarah Carter's home carrying a box filled with memories, but he left knowing that he had found something much greater. He had found a reason to stop running from the past. At the kitchen table, Noah sat beside the old photographs, carefully studying each one. Every picture showed a different piece of his father's life. A young Marine smiling with friends. A family gathering filled with warmth. A German Shepherd K9 standing proudly beside Michael Carter. Noah looked at Daniel with curiosity. "Was my dad happy?" he asked. Daniel smiled gently. "Your father was one of the happiest people I ever knew." The answer surprised Noah. He had always imagined his father as someone distant, someone from stories that felt too far away. But now he was learning that Michael was a person with dreams, kindness, and a heart that cared deeply for others. Daniel spent the afternoon sharing memories that had been hidden for years. He told Noah about how Michael always carried extra supplies because he never wanted someone else to go without. He talked about how Michael treated Ranger not as a tool, but as a trusted partner. Every story helped Noah understand the man behind the photograph. Later, Daniel returned to the ammo box and found a small envelope placed beneath the letters. It was different from the others. The paper looked older, but the writing was clear. His name was written on the front. Daniel took a slow breath before opening it. Inside was a final message from Michael. The first line immediately caught his attention. "Daniel, if you are reading this, then you finally found your way back." Daniel paused. Those words felt almost impossible. It was as if Michael understood that Daniel would need time. The letter explained that Michael never blamed him for the years that passed. He knew life could take people in different directions. He knew some promises became difficult to carry. But he also believed that kindness had a way of returning when people needed it most. Daniel continued reading as the room became silent around him. Michael wrote about Noah. He wrote about wanting his son to know that he was loved every single day. He wrote that memories were not meant to keep people trapped in the past. They were meant to help people understand where they came from. Daniel lowered the letter and looked at Noah. The boy was holding one of the photographs of his father and Ranger. In that moment, Daniel understood why the old K9 had traveled through the snow. Ranger was not delivering an object. He was delivering a message. He was bringing together the people Michael cared about most. That evening, Daniel walked outside with Ranger while the sky turned orange over the mountains. The old German Shepherd moved slowly beside him. Daniel placed a hand on the dog's collar and whispered, "You knew this was where we needed to be." Ranger looked up calmly. Daniel smiled because he finally understood. Some journeys are not about finding a destination. They are about finding the people waiting there. The days after the discovery of Michael Carter's final message felt different for everyone. The same house that once held unanswered questions now carried the quiet feeling of something being restored. Sarah Carter spent her mornings organizing the photographs and letters from the ammo box, placing each memory carefully into a safe place. Noah spent hours looking through them, discovering small details about a father he never had the chance to know. And Daniel Brooks found himself staying longer than he originally planned. He told himself it was only to help explain the memories. But deep down, he knew there was another reason. For the first time in years, he felt like he belonged somewhere. One afternoon, Daniel and Noah sat outside near the porch while Ranger rested nearby in the sunlight. The old German shepherd watched them quietly, his ears moving whenever their voices carried through the air. Noah held one of the old photographs in his hands. It showed Michael and Ranger standing together during their years of service. "Did he know I would see this someday?" Noah asked. Daniel looked at the photograph before answering. "I think your father hoped you would know how much he cared about you." Noah looked down at the picture. "I wish I could have met him." Daniel understood those words more than anyone. There were moments when he wished he could return to the past and make different choices. But he had learned something important. Time could not be changed, but love could still move forward. That evening, Daniel helped Sarah place the last items from the ammo box into a wooden memory case. Among the letters was one final note from Michael that they had not noticed before. It was small and folded between two photographs. Sarah opened it carefully. The message was short, but every word carried meaning. Michael wrote that the greatest things people leave behind are not possessions. They are the kindness they show, the lives they touch, and the memories they create. Daniel read those words silently and felt them settle in his heart. For years, he believed he was defined by the moments he could not change. But Michael's message reminded him that a person's story is not finished because of one difficult chapter. Later that night, Daniel walked with Ranger along the quiet road near the house. The cold air returned, but it no longer felt lonely. "You knew, didn't you?" Daniel said softly. "You knew where you needed to go." Ranger continued walking beside him, steady and calm. Daniel smiled because he finally understood the journey. The old K-9 had not crossed the snow because of an order. He had done it because someone needed to remember. The next morning, Noah asked Daniel if he would teach him more about Ranger. Daniel agreed without hesitation. They spent the day walking, sharing stories, and learning about the bond between a Marine and his K-9 partner. Noah discovered that Ranger was not just part of his father's past. He was part of his own story now. And Daniel discovered something unexpected. He thought he was helping a child learn about his father. But in truth, that child was helping him rediscover himself. The ammo box had revealed a secret, but the greatest discovery was not inside the box. It was the connection created because someone never gave up on a promise. The bond between Daniel, Noah, and Ranger grew stronger with each passing day. What began as a mysterious return from a winter storm slowly became something much more meaningful. It was no longer about an old ammo box or a forgotten message. It was about the people who found each other because of it. Daniel noticed small changes in Noah. The boy who once looked at his father's memories with uncertainty now looked at them with pride. He asked questions about Michael every day, wanting to understand the person behind the photographs and stories. Daniel answered every question he could, sharing moments that he had kept hidden for many years. One afternoon, Noah and Daniel sat together in the garage while Ranger rested nearby. They were looking through old items from Daniel's time as a Marine. Noah picked up a small K-9 training tag and looked at it carefully. "Was Ranger always this loyal?" he asked. Daniel smiled. "From the first day I met him." Daniel explained that Ranger was never just trained to follow commands. The connection between them was built on trust. The dog learned Daniel's habits, understood his emotions, and stayed close during difficult moments. Noah listened carefully, realizing that the same loyalty Ranger gave Daniel was the same loyalty he had given his father. Later that week, Sarah invited Daniel and Noah to visit a quiet field outside town. It was a place where Michael used to spend time with his family. The sky was clear, and the mountains stood peacefully in the distance. Ranger walked slowly through the grass, stopping occasionally to look around as if remembering a place from long ago. Daniel watched him and felt a deep sense of gratitude. The old K-9 had carried more than a box. He had carried a connection between people who needed each other. Noah stood beside Daniel, holding a photograph of Michael and Ranger. "I think my dad would be happy," he said. Daniel looked at the boy and nodded. "I think he would be too." For Daniel, those words meant more than Noah realized. For years, he carried the weight of believing he had not done enough. But now he understood that Michael's final message was never about regret. It was about continuing the kindness that someone else started. That evening, Daniel returned to his cabin with Ranger. The old place felt different now. The silence was still there, but it was no longer empty. There were memories on the walls, photographs on the table, and a reason to look forward to tomorrow. Daniel placed the ammo box in a safe place near the fireplace. He no longer saw it as a reminder of something lost. He saw it as proof that some promises can survive time, distance, and change. Ranger rested beside him, his eyes closing peacefully. Daniel looked at the old German shepherd and quietly said, "You were never trying to bring back the past. You were trying to bring people together." The dog slowly lifted his head, then rested again. It was a simple moment, but Daniel felt its meaning. The mission that started years ago was finally reaching its final chapter. But Daniel knew something else was beginning. A new friendship, a new family, a new reason to wake up each morning. Because sometimes the greatest miracles do not arrive with noise. Sometimes they walk quietly through the snow, carrying a forgotten promise home. Months passed, but the story of Daniel, Noah, and Ranger continued to live quietly in the hearts of everyone who knew it. The winter storm that brought an old German Shepherd K9 back into Daniel's life became a memory filled with warmth, not sadness. The ammo box that once represented a forgotten chapter was now a symbol of connection, hope, and a promise that had finally found its way home. Daniel returned to his cabin in Montana, but life no longer felt the same. The quiet mornings were different. He still enjoyed his coffee beside the window and the peaceful view of the mountains, but now there was always a reason to smile. There were messages from Sarah. There were visits from Noah. And there was Ranger, resting near the fireplace, just like he had always belonged there. The old K9 moved slower with each passing season, but his loyalty never changed. One afternoon, Daniel and Noah returned to the place where everything began. The snowy path where Ranger had first appeared was now covered with fresh grass under the spring sunlight. Noah carried a small photograph of his father and Ranger. He looked at the mountains and smiled. "I think I understand now," he said. Daniel looked at him. "Understand what?" Noah held the photograph close. "Why Ranger came back." Daniel stayed quiet, letting the boy finish. "He did not come back because of the box. He came back because someone needed to remember." Daniel felt those words deeply. They were simple, but they carried a truth he had spent years trying to find. The greatest part of the journey was never the discovery inside the box. It was the people who found each other because of it. Later that evening, Daniel placed the old ammo box on a wooden shelf in his cabin. Inside were the letters, photographs, and memories that connected him to Michael Carter forever. But beside the box, he placed something new. A photograph of Noah and Ranger together. A reminder that every story could have another chapter. Daniel sat beside Ranger outside the cabin as the sun slowly disappeared behind the mountains. The old German shepherd rested peacefully beside him, feeling the warmth of the evening air. Daniel looked at his loyal friend and remembered the night everything changed. He remembered the snow, the mystery, the old promise that returned after so many years. But most importantly, he remembered the lesson Ranger had taught him. Loyalty does not disappear with time. Love does not disappear when people are separated. And some promises are simply waiting for the right moment to be completed. Daniel gently placed his hand on Ranger's collar. "You finished your mission," he whispered. The old K9 opened his eyes and looked at him calmly. In that quiet moment, Daniel realized that Ranger had given him something greater than an answer. He had given him a new beginning. The story of the Marine and the K9 was never about a box. It was about trust. It was about family. It was about finding a way back to the people who mattered most. As the stars appeared above the Montana sky, Daniel sat beside Ranger, knowing that some heroes do not need recognition. Some heroes simply follow their hearts. And sometimes, the smallest act of loyalty can change a life forever.